So, it is your Witch of Salem reading the Witch of Portobello. So, let's get started. Deidre O'Neill, known as Etta. What do you mean, Hagia Sophia? It was her, Athena. But by touching the deepest part of the river that flows through her soul, she had come into contact with the mother. All she did was to see what was happening in another reality. The young actress's mother, now that she's dead, lives in a place outside of time and so is able to change the course of events, whereas we human beings can only know about the present. But that's no small thing. Discovering a dormant illness before it gets worse, touching nervous systems, and unblocking energies are within the reach of us all. Of course, many died at the stake, others were exiled, and many ended up hiding or suppressing the spark of the Great Mother in their souls. I never brought Athena into contact with the power. She decided to do this because the Mother had already given her various signs. She was a light. While she danced, she changed into letters. While she was learning calligraphy, she appeared to her in a fire and in a mirror. What my student didn't know was how to live with her until, that is, she did something that provoked this whole chain of events. Athena, who was always telling everyone to be different, was basically just like all other mortals. She had her own rhythm, a kind of cruise control. Was she more curious than most? Possibly. Definitely. My own opinion. I had to interject there. This woman was a bit jealous, let's be real. Had she managed to overcome her sense of being a victim? Definitely. Did she feel a need to share what she was learning with others, be they bank employees or actors? In some cases, the answer was yes, but in others, I had to encourage her because we are not meant for solitude, and we only know ourselves when we see ourselves in the eyes of others. But that was as far as my interference went. Maybe the mother wanted to appear that night, and perhaps she whispered something in her ear. Go against everything you've learned so far. You, who are a mistress of rhythm, allow the rhythm to pass through your body, but don't obey it. That was why Athena suggested the exercise. Her unconscious was already prepared to receive the mother, but Athena herself was still dancing in time to the music. And so any external elements were unable to manifest themselves. The same thing used to happen with me. The best way to meditate and enter into contact with the light was by knitting something my mother had taught me when I was a child. I knew how to count the stitches, manipulate the needles, and create beautiful things through repetition and harmony. One day, my protector asked me to knit in a completely irrational way. I found this really distressing because I'd learned how to knit with affection, patience, and dedication. Nevertheless, he insisted on me knitting really badly. I knitted like this for 2 hours, thinking all the time that it was utterly ridiculous, absurd. My head ached, but I had to resist letting the needles guide my hand. Anyone can do things badly, so why was he asking this of me? Because he knew about my obsession with geometry and with perfection. And suddenly it had happened. I stopped moving the needles, and I felt a great emptiness, which was filled by a warm, loving, companionable presence. Everything around me was different, and I felt like saying things that I would never normally dare to say. I didn't lose consciousness. I knew I was still me, but paradoxically, I wasn't the person I was used to being with. So I can see what happened even though I wasn't there. Athena's soul followed the sound of the music while her body went in a totally contrary direction. After a time, her soul disconnected from her body. A space opened and the mother could finally enter. Or rather, a spark from the mother appeared. Ancient, but apparently very young. Wise, but not omnipotent. Special, but not in the least arrogant. Her perceptions changed, and she began to see the same things she used to see when she was a child. The parallel universes that people of this world, at such moments, we can see not only the physical body, but people's emotions too. They say cats have the same power, and I believe them. Dude, I worship the hell out of cats, let me tell you what. A kind of blanket lies between the physical and the spiritual world. A blanket that changes in color, intensity, and light. It's what mystics call aura. From then on, everything is easy. The aura tells you what's going on. If I had been there, she would have seen a violet color with a few yellow splotches around my body. That means that I still have a long road ahead. Of me, and that my mission on this earth has not been yet accomplished. Mixed up with human auras are transparent forms, which people usually call ghosts. That was the case with the young woman's mother, and only in such cases can someone's fate be altered. I'm almost certain that the young actress, even before she asked, knew that her mother was beside her, and the only real surprise to her was the story about the handbag. Confronted by that rhythmless dance, everyone was really intimidated. Why? Because we're used to doing things as they should be done. No one likes to make the wrong moves, especially when we're aware that we're doing so. Even Athena, it can't have been easy for her to suggest doing something that went against everything she loved. I'm glad that the mother won the battle at that point. A man had been saved from cancer, another has accepted his sexuality, and a third has stopped taking sleeping pills, and all because Athena broke the rhythm, slapping on the brakes when the car was traveling at top speed, and thus throwing everything into disarray. To go back to my knitting, I used that method of knitting badly for quite some time until I managed to provoke the presence without any artificial means. Now that I knew it, I was used to it. And the same thing happened with Athena. Once we know where the doors of perception are, it's really easy to open and close them when we get used to our own strange behavior. And it must be said that I knitted much faster and better after that, just as Athena danced with much more soul and rhythm once she dared to break down those barriers. Andrea McCain, actress. The story spread like wildfire. On the following Monday, when the theater was closed, Athena's apartment was packed. We had all brought friends. She did as she had on the previous evening. She made us dance without rhythm, as if she needed that collective energy in order to get in touch with Hagia Sophia. The boy was there again, and I decided to watch him. When he sat down on the sofa, the music stopped and the trance began, as did the questions. The first 3 questions were, as you can imagine, about love. Will he stay with me? Does she love me? Is he cheating on me? Athena said nothing. The 4th person to receive no answer asked again, more loudly this time. So is he cheating on me or not? I am Hagia Sophia, universal wisdom. I came into the world accompanied only by love. I am the beginning of everything, and before I existed there was chaos. Therefore, if any of you wish to control the forces that prevailed in chaos, do not ask Hagia Sophia. For me, love fills everything. It cannot be desired because it is an end in itself. It cannot betray because it has nothing to do with possession. It cannot be held prisoner because it is a river and will overflow its banks. Anyone who tries to imprison love will cut off the spring that feeds it, and the trapped water will grow stagnant and rank. Bro, I've been saying the same shit. I'm just saying. like honestly, love is not a possessive thing. It's it's a way of admiring and appreciating somebody. You ain't gotta own them. You ain't gotta put rules on them. Let people do what they want and see what they want to do, right? If you don't like what they want to do, then you're the one that has an issue, My personal opinion. I'll stop interjecting, I swear. This book is just so fucking good, guys, okay? Hagia looked around the group, most of whom... Hold up. That didn't even work. Hagia looked around the group, most of whom were there for the first time, and she began to point out what she saw: the threat of disease, problems at work, frictions between parents and children, sexuality, potentialities that existed but were not being explored. I remember her turning to one woman in her 30s and saying, "Your father told you how things should be and how a woman should behave. And you've always fought against your dream. And I want has never even shown its face. It's always drowned out by I must, or I hope, or I need. But you're a wonderful singer. 1 year's experience could make a huge difference to your work. But I have a husband and child. Athena has a child too. Your husband will be upset at first, but he'll come to accept it eventually. And you don't need to be Hagia Sophia to know that. Maybe I'm too old. You're refusing to accept who you are, but that is not my problem. I've said what needed to be said." Gradually, everyone in that room, unable to sit down because there wasn't enough space, sweating profusely, even though the winter was nearly over, feeling ridiculous for having come to such an event, was called upon to receive Hagia Sophia's advice. I was the last. "Stay behind afterward if you want to stop being two and to be one instead." This time, I didn't have her son on my lap. He watched everything that happened, and it seemed that the conversation they'd had after the first session had been enough for him to lose his fear. I nodded, unlike the previous session when people had simply left when she asked to talk to her son alone. This time, Hagia Sophia gave sermon before ending the ritual. "You are not here to receive definite answers. My mission is to provoke you. In the past, both governors and governed went to oracles who would foretell the future. The future, however, is unreliable because it is guided by decisions made in the here and now. Keep the bicycle moving, because if you stop pedaling, you will fall off. For those of you who came to meet Hagia Sophia wanting her merely to confirm what you hope to be true, please do not come back, or else start dancing and make those around you dance too. Fate will be implacable with those who want to live in a universe that is dead and gone. The new world belongs to the Mother, who came with love to separate the heavens from the waters. Anyone who believes they have failed will always fail. Anyone who has decided that they cannot behave any differently will be destroyed by routine. Anyone who has decided to block all changes will be transformed into dust. Cursed be those who do not dance and who prevent others from dancing." Her eyes glanced fire. "You can go." Everyone left, and I could see the look of confusion on most of their faces. They had come in search of comfort and had found only provocation. They had arrived wanting to be told how love can be controlled and had heard that the all-devouring flame will always burn everything, and they wanted to be sure that their decisions were the right ones and that their husbands, wives, and bosses were pleased with them. But instead, they were given only words of doubt. People, though, were smiling. They had understood the importance of the dance, and from that night on, would doubtless allow their bodies and souls to drift, even though, as always happens, they would have to pay a price. Only the boy, Hagia Sophia, Heron, and myself were left in the room. "I asked you to stay here alone." Without a word, Heron picked up his coat and left. Hagia Sophia was looking at me, and little by little I watched her change back into Athena. The only way of describing that change is to compare it with the change that takes place in an angry child. We can see the anger in the child's eyes, but once distracted and once the anger is gone, the child is no longer the same child who only moments before was crying. The being, if it could be called that, seemed to have vanished into the air as soon as its instrument lost concentration. And now I was standing before an apparently exhausted woman. "Make me some tea." She was giving me an order, and she was no longer universal wisdom, but merely someone my boyfriend was interested in or infatuated with. Where would this relationship take us? But making a cup of tea wouldn't destroy my self-esteem. I went into the kitchen, boiled some water, added a few chamomile leaves, and returned to the living room. The child was asleep on her lap. "You don't like me," she said. I made no reply. "I don't like you either," she went on. "You're pretty and elegant, a fine actress, and have a degree of culture and education which I despite my family's wishes, do not. But you're also insecure, arrogant, and suspicious. As Hagia Sophia said, you are two, when you could be one. I didn't know how you remembered what you said during the trance, because in that case you are two people as well, Athena and Hagia Sophia. I may have two names, but I am only one, or else all the people in the world. And that is precisely what I want to talk about, because I am one, and everyone. The spark that emerges when I go into trance gives me a very precise instructions. I remain semi-conscious throughout, of course, but I'm saying things that come from some unknown part of myself, as if I were suckling on the breast of the mother, drinking the milk that flows through all our souls and carries knowledge around the earth. Last week, which was the first time I entered into contact with this new form, I received what seemed to me to be an absurd message, that I should teach you. She paused. Obviously, this struck me as quite mad, because I don't like you at all. She paused again, for longer this time. Today, though, the source repeated the same message, and so I'm giving you that choice. Why do you call it Hagia Sophia? That was my idea. It's the name of a really beautiful mosque I saw in a book. You could, if you like, be my student. That's what brought you here on that first day. This whole new stage in my life, including the discovery of Hagia Sophia inside me, only happened because one day you came through that door and said, I work in the theater and we're putting on a play about the female face of God. I heard from a journalist friend that you've spent time with in the Balkan Mountains with some gypsies and would be prepared to tell me about your experiences there. Are you going to teach me everything you know? No. Everything I don't know. I'll learn through being in contact with you. As I said, the first time we met, and as I say again now, once I've learned what I need to learn, we'll go our separate ways. Can you teach someone you dislike? I can love and respect someone I dislike. On the 2 occasions when I went into trance, I saw your aura, and it was the most highly developed aura I've ever seen. You could make a difference in this world if you accept my proposal. Will you teach me to see auras? Until it happened to me the first time, I myself didn't know I was capable of doing so. If you're on the right path, you'll learn too. I realized then that I too was capable of loving someone I disliked. I said yes. Then let us transform that acceptance into a ritual that throws us into an unknown world. But we know that we cannot treat the things of that world lightly. It isn't enough to say yes. You must put your life at risk, and without giving it much thought either. If you're the woman I think you are, you won't say, I need to think about it. You'll say, I'm ready. Let's move on to the ritual. Where did you learn the ritual, by the way? And I'm going to learn it now. I no longer need to remove myself from my normal rhythm in order to enter into contact with the spark from the mother. Because once that spark is installed inside you, it's easy to find again. I know which door I need to open, even though it's concealed among many other entrances and exits. All I need is a little silence. Silence again. We sat there, our eyes wide and staring, as if we were about to begin a fight to the death. Rituals. Before I even rang the bell of Athena's apartment for the first time, I had already taken part in various rituals, only to feel used and diminished afterwards. Standing outside a door I could see, but not open. Rituals. All Athena did was drink a little of the tea I prepared for her. The ritual is not over. I asked you to do something for me. You did, and I accepted it. Now it's your turn to ask me something. I immediately thought of Heron, but it wasn't the right moment to talk about him. Take your clothes off. She didn't ask me why. She looked at the child and checked that he was asleep, and immediately began to remove her sweater. No, really, you don't have to, I said. I don't know why I asked that. But she continued to undress. First her blouse, then her jeans, then her bra. I noticed her breasts, which were the most beautiful I'd ever seen. Finally, she removed her knickers, and there she was, offering me her nakedness. "Bless me," said Athena. "Bless thy teacher." But I'd already taken the first step and couldn't stop now, so I dipped my fingers into the cup and sprinkled a little tea over her body. Just as this plant was transformed into tea, just as the water mingled with the plant, I bless you and ask the Great Mother that the spring from which this water came will never cease flowing, and that the earth from which this plant came will always be fertile and generous. I was surprised at my own words. They had come neither from inside me nor outside. It was as if I'd always known them, and had done this countless times before. "You have been blessed. You can get dressed now." But she didn't move. She merely smiled. What did she want? If Hagia Sophia was capable of seeing auras, she would know that I hadn't the slightest desire to have sex with another woman. One moment. She picked up the boy, carried him to his room, and returned at once. "You take your clothes off, too." Who was asking this? Hagia Sophia, who spoke of my potential and for whom I was the perfect disciple, or Athena, whom I hardly knew and who seemed capable of anything? A woman whom life had taught to go beyond her limits and to satisfy any curiosity. We started a kind of confrontation from which there was no retreat. I got undressed with the same nonchalance and the same smile and the same look in my eyes. She took my hands and we sat down on the sofa. During the next half hour, both Athena and Hagia Sophia were present. They wanted to know what my next steps would be. As they asked me this question, I saw that everything really was written there before me, and that the doors had only been closed before because I hadn't realized that I was the one person in the world with the authority to open them. Boom. Caroline Ryan, journalist. The deputy editor hands me a video, and we go into the projection room to watch it. This video was made on the morning of April 26, 1986, and shows a normal life in a normal town. A man sitting, drinking a cup of coffee. A mother is taking her baby for a walk. People are in a hurry for going to work. A few people are waiting at a bus stop. A man on a bench in a square is reading a newspaper, but there's a problem with the video. There are various horizontal lines on the screen, as if the tracking button needed to be adjusted. Sorry. Red Bull. I get up to do this, but the deputy editor stops me. "That's just the way it is. Keep watching." Images of the small provincial town continue to appear, showing nothing of interest apart from these scenes from ordinary everyday life. It's possible that some people may know that there's been an accident 2 kilometers from there, says my boss. It's possible that they know there have been 30 deaths, a large number, but not enough to change the routine of the town's inhabitants. Now the film shows school buses parking. They will stay there for many days. The images are getting worse and worse. It isn't the tracking, it's radiation. The video is made by the KGB. On the night of April 26th at 23 minutes past in the morning, the worst ever man-made disaster occurred at Chernobyl in the Ukraine. When the nuclear reactor exploded, the people in that area were exposed to 90 times more radiation than that given out by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The whole region should have been evacuated at once, but no one said anything. After all, the government doesn't make mistakes. Only a week later, on page 32 of the local newspaper, a 5-line article appeared mentioning the deaths of workers but giving no further explanation. Meanwhile, Workers' Day was celebrated throughout the former Soviet Union and in Kiev. Right? That's right. Kiev. Okay. The Ukrainian capital. People paraded down the street, unaware of the invisible death in the air. He concludes, "I want you to go and see what Chernobyl is like now. You've just been promoted to special correspondent. You'll get 20% increase in your salary, and you'll be able to suggest the kind of article you think we should be publishing. I should be jumping for joy, but instead I'm gripped by a feeling of intense sadness, which I have to hide. It's impossible to argue with him, to say that there are two women in my life at the time, or at the moment, and I don't want to leave London, that my life and my mental equilibrium are at stake. I asked when I should leave. As soon as possible, he says, because there are rumors that other countries are significantly increasing their production of nuclear energy. I managed to negotiate an honorable way out, saying that first I need to talk to experts and really get a grip on the subject, and that I'll set off once I've collected the necessary material. He agrees, shakes my hand, and congratulates me. I don't have time to talk to Andrea because when I get home, she's still at the theater. I fall asleep at once and again wake up to find a note saying that she's gone to work and that coffee is on the table. I go to the office, try to ingratiate myself with the boss who has improved my life, and phone various experts on radiation and energy. I discover that in total, 9 million people worldwide were directly affected by the disaster, including 3 to 4 million children. The initial 30 deaths became, according to the expert John Goffman's, 475,000 cases of fatal cancers and an equal number of non-fatal cancers. A total of 2,000 towns and villages were simply wiped off the map, according to the health ministry in Belarus. The incidence of cancer of the thyroid will increase considerably between 2005 and 2010, and as a consequence of continuing high levels of radioactivity. Another specialist explains that in addition to the 9 million people directly exposed to radiation, more than 65 million in many countries around the world were indirectly affected by consuming contaminated foodstuffs. Grow your own garden, okay? It's a serious matter which deserves to be treated with respect. At the end of the day, I go back to the deputy editor and suggest that I travel to Chernobyl for the actual anniversary of the accident, and meanwhile do more research, talk to more experts, and find out how the British government responded to the tragedy. He agrees. I phone Athena. After all, she claims to be going out with someone from Scotland Yard, and now is the time to ask her a favor. Given that Chernobyl is no longer classified as secret, the Soviet Union no longer exists. And she promises that she'll talk to her boyfriend, but says that she can't guarantee she'll get the answers I want. She also says that she's leaving for Scotland the following day and will only be back in time for the next group meeting. What group? The group, she says. So that's become a regular thing, has it? What I want to know is when we can meet and talk and clear up various loose ends. But she's already hung up. I go home, watch the news, and have supper alone. And later I go out again and to pick up Andrea from the theater. I get there in time to see the end of the play, and to my surprise, the person on stage seems totally unlike the person I've been living with for nearly 2 years. There's something magical about her. Every gesture, monologues, and dialogues are spoken with an unaccustomed intensity. I'm seeing a stranger, a woman I would like to have by my side. And then I realize that she is by my side and is in no way a stranger to me. How did your chat with Athena go? I asked on the way home. Fine. How was work? She was the one to change the subject. I tell her about my promotion and about Chernobyl, but she doesn't seem interested. I start to think that I'm losing the love I have without having yet won the love I hoped to win. However, as soon as we reach our apartment, she suggests that we take a bath together, and before I know it, we're in bed. First, she puts on that percussion music at full volume. She explains that she managed to get a hold of a copy and tells me not to worry about the neighbors. People worry too much about them, she says, and never live their own lives. What happens from then on is something that goes beyond my understanding. Has this woman making positively savage love with me finally discovered her sexuality? And was this taught to her or provoked in her by that other woman? Well, she was clinging to me with a violence I've never known before. She kept saying, "Today I'm your man and you're my woman." We carried on like this for almost an hour, and I experienced things I'd never dared experience before. At certain moments, I felt ashamed and wanted to ask her to stop, but she seemed to be in complete control of the situation, so I surrendered because I had no choice. In fact, I felt really curious. I was exhausted afterward, but Andrea seemed re-energized. "Before you go to sleep, I want you to know something," she said. "If I go forward, sex will offer you the chance to make love with gods and goddesses. That's what you experienced today. I want you to go to sleep knowing that I awoke the mother that was in you." Boom. I wanted to ask if she learned this from Athena, but my courage failed. "Tell me that you liked being a woman for a night." I did. I don't know if I would always like it, but it was something that simultaneously frightened me and gave me great joy. "Tell me that you've always wanted to experience what you've just experienced." It's one thing to allow oneself to be carried away by the situation, but quite another to comment coolly on the matter. I said nothing, although I was sure she knew my answer. "Well," Andrea went on, "all of this was inside me, and I had no idea, as was the person behind the mask that fell away while I was on stage today. Did you notice anything different? Of course, you were radiating a special light, charisma, a divine force that manifests itself in men and women. The supernatural power we don't need to show anyone because everyone can see it, even usually insensitive people. But it only happens when we're naked, when we die to the world and are reborn to ourselves. Last night I died. Tonight, when I walked on stage, I saw that I was doing exactly what I had chosen to do. I was reborn from my ashes. I was always trying to be who I am, but could never manage it. I was always trying to impress other people, have intelligent conversations, please my parents, and at the same time, I used every available means to do the things I would really like to do. I've always forged my path with blood, tears, and willpower, but last night I realized that I was going about it the wrong way. My dream doesn't require that of me. I have only to surrender myself to it, and if I find I'm suffering, grit my teeth because the suffering will pass. Why are you telling me this? Let me finish. In that journey, where suffering seemed to be the only rule, I struggled for things for which there was no point struggling, like love, for example. People either feel it or they don't, and there isn't a force in the world that can make them feel it. We can pretend that we love each other. We can get used to each other. We can live a whole lifetime of friendship and complicity. We can bring up children, have sex every night, reach orgasm, and still feel that there's a terrible emptiness about it all, that something important is missing. In the name of all that I've learned about relationships between men and women, I've been trying to fight against things that weren't really worth the struggle, and that includes you. Today, while we were making love, well, I was giving all I have, and I could see that you too were giving of your best. I realized that your best no longer interests me, and I will sleep beside you tonight, but tomorrow I'll leave. The theater is my ritual, and there I can express and develop whatever I want to express and develop. I started to regret everything, going to Transylvania and meeting a woman who might be destroying my life, arranging that first meeting of the group, confessing my love in that restaurant. At that moment, I hated Athena. I know what you're thinking, said Andrea, that your friend Athena has brainwashed me, but that isn't true. I'm a man. Even though tonight in bed I behaved like a woman. I'm a species in danger of extinction because I don't see many men around. Few people would risk what I have risked. I'm sure you're right, and that's why I admire you. But aren't you going to ask me who I am, what I want, and what I desire? I asked. I want everything. I want savagery and tenderness. I want to upset the neighbors and placate them too. Sorry. I don't want a woman in my bed. I want men, real men like you, for example. Whether they love me or merely using me, it doesn't matter. My love is greater than that. I want to love freely, and I want to allow people around me to do the same. What I talked about to Athena were the simple ways of awakening repressed energy, like making love, for example, or walking down the street saying, I'm here and now. Nothing very special, no secret ritual. The only thing that made our meeting slightly different was that we were both naked. From now on, she and I will meet every Monday, and if I have any comments to make, I will do so after that session. I have no desire to be her friend, just as when she feels the need to share something, she goes up to Scotland to talk with that Edda woman, who it seems you know as well, although you've never mentioned her. I can't even remember meeting her. I sensed that Andrea was gradually calming down. I prepared 2 cups of coffee and we drank them together. She recovered her smile and asked about my promotion. She said she was worried about those Monday meetings because she learned only that morning that friends of friends were inviting other people, and Athena's apartment was a very small place. I made an enormous effort to pretend that everything that had happened that evening was just a fit of nerves or premenstrual tension or jealousy on her part. I put my arms around her and she snuggled into my shoulder, and despite my own exhaustion, I waited until she fell asleep. That night I dreamed of nothing. I had no feelings of foreboding. And the following morning when I woke up, I saw that her clothes were gone and the key was on the table, and there was no letter of farewell. Deirdre O'Neill, known as Etta. People read a lot of stories about witches, fairies, paranormal, and children possessed by evil spirits. They go to films showing rituals featuring pentagrams, swords, and invocations. That's fine. People need to give free rein to their imagination and go through certain stages. Anyone who gets through those stages without being deceived will eventually get in touch with the tradition. The real tradition is this. The teacher never tells the disciple what he or she should do. They're merely traveling companions, sharing the same uncomfortable feeling of estrangement when confronted by ever-changing perceptions. Broadening horizons, closing doors, rivers that sometimes seem to block their path, and which in fact should never be crossed but followed. There is only one difference between the teacher and disciple. The former is slightly less afraid than the latter. Then, when they sit down at the table or in front of a fire to talk, the more experienced person might say, "Why don't you do that?" But he or she never says, "Go there and you'll arrive where I did," because every path and every destination are unique to the individual. The true teacher gives the disciple the courage to throw his or her world off balance. Even though the disciple is afraid of things already encountered and more afraid still of what might be around the next corner. I was a young, enthusiastic doctor who, filled by desire to help my fellow human beings, traveled to the interior of Romania on an exchange program run by the British government. I set off with my luggage full of medicines and my head full of preconceptions. I had clear ideas about how people should behave and about what we need to be happy, about the dreams we should keep alive inside us, and about how human relations should evolve. I arrived in Bucharest during that crazed, bloody dictatorship, went to Transylvania to assist with a mass vaccination program for the local population. I didn't realize that I was merely one more piece on a very complicated chessboard, where invisible hands were manipulating my idealism, and that ulterior motives lay behind everything I believed was being done for humanitarian purposes, stabilizing the government run by the dictator's son, allowing Britain to sell arms in a market dominated by the Soviets. All my good intentions collapsed when I saw that there was barely enough vaccine to go around and that there were other diseases sweeping the region. That however often I wrote asking for more resources, they never came. I was told not to concern myself with anything beyond what I'd been asked to do. I felt powerless and angry. I'd seen poverty from close up and would have been able to do something about it if only someone would give me some money, but they weren't interested in results. Our government just wanted a few articles in the press so that they could say to their political parties or to their electorate that they dispatched groups to various places in the world on a humanitarian mission. Their intentions were good, apart from selling arms, of course. Sounds about right. Oh no. Okay. I was in despair. What kind of world was this? One night I set off into the icy forest, cursing God. I gotta readjust, sorry guys. Who was unfair to everything and everyone. I'm sorry, it's funny. I was sitting beneath an oak tree when my protector approached me. He said that I could die of cold, and I replied that I was a doctor and knew the body's limits, and that as soon as I felt I was getting near those limits, I would go back to the camp. I asked him what he was doing there. I'm speaking to a woman who can hear me, in a world in which all the men have gone deaf. I thought he meant me, but the woman he was referring to was the forest itself. When I saw this man wandering about among the trees, making gestures and saying things I couldn't understand, a kind of peace settled in my heart. I was not, after all, the only person in the world left talking to myself. When I got up to return to the camp, he came over to me. I know who you are, he said. People in the village say that you're a very decent person, always good-humored and prepared to help others, but I see something else, rage and frustration. He might have been a government spy, but I decided to tell him everything I was feeling, even though I ran the risk of being arrested. He walked together to a field hospital where I was working. I took him to the dormitory, which was empty at the time. My colleagues were all having fun at the annual festival being held in town, and I asked if he'd like a drink. He produced a bottle from his pocket. Palinka, he said, meaning the traditional drink of Romania, with an incredibly high alcohol content. On me. We drank together, and I didn't even notice that I was getting steadily drunk. I only realized the state I was in when I tried to go to the toilet and tripped over something and fell flat. Don't move, said the man. Look at what is there before your eyes. A line of ants. They all think they're very wise. They have memory, intelligence, organizational powers, a spirit of sacrifice. They look for food in summer stored away for the winter. And now they're setting forth again in this icy spring to work. If the world was destroyed by an atomic bomb tomorrow, the ants would survive. How do you know all this? I studied biology. Why the hell don't you work to improve the living conditions of your own people? What are you doing in the middle of the forest talking to the trees? Same though. In the first place, I wasn't alone, apart from the trees you were listening to me to. But to answer your question, I left biology to work as a blacksmith. I struggled to my feet. My head was still spinning, but I was thinking clearly enough to understand the poor man's situation. Despite a university education, he had been unable to find work. I told him that the same thing had happened in my country too. No, that's not what I meant. I left biology because I wanted to work as a blacksmith. Even as a child, I was fascinated by those men hammering steel, making a strange kind of music, sending out sparks all around, plunging the red-hot metal into water, and creating clouds of steam. I was unhappy as a biologist because my dream was to make rigid metal take on soft shapes, and then one day a protector appeared. A protector? Let's say that. On seeing those ants doing exactly what they're programmed to do, you were to exclaim, how fantastic! The guards are genetically prepared to sacrifice themselves for the queen. The workers carry leaves 10 times their own weight. The engineers make tunnels that can resist storms and floods. They enter into mortal combat with their enemies. They suffer for the community, and they never ask, Why are we doing this? People try to imitate the perfect society of ants, and as a biologist, I was playing my part until someone came along with this question: are you happy doing what you're doing? Of course I am, I said. I'm being useful to my own people, and that's enough. I didn't know whether it was enough or not, but I said that he seemed to me to be both arrogant and egotistical. He replied, possibly, but all you will achieve is to repeat what has been done. Since man was man, keeping things organized, but the world has progressed, I said. He asked if I knew any history. Of course I did. Hold up. No, wait, you know what? Let's show the world. Okay.
This is
Oliver, show him what you're doing.
I'm making Legos.
Here, show your face.
I'm making Legos. And yeah, 'cause my mom's nice and bought me Legos. And I'm building them.
I'm proud of you. You're doing so good. Let me know if you need any help, dude.
Okay.
My own little viewer. Alright, so because he told me, oh wait, I think I'm here. I might not be. Sorry. I didn't know whether it was enough or not, but I said that he seemed to me to be both arrogant and egotistical. He replied, possibly, but all you will achieve is to repeat what has been done since man was man, keeping things organized. But the world has progressed, I said. He asked if I knew any history. Of course I did. He asked another question. Thousands of years ago, weren't we capable of building enormous structures like pyramids? Weren't we capable of worshiping gods, weaving, making fire, finding lovers and wives, sending messages? Of course we were. But although we've succeeded in replacing slaves with wage slaves, all the advances we've made have been in the field of science. Human beings are still asking the same questions as their ancestors. In short, they haven't evolved at all. At that point, I understood that the person asking me these questions was someone sent from heaven, an angel, a protector. Why do you call him a protector? Because he told me that there were two traditions. One that makes us repeat the same thing for centuries at a time, and another that opens the door into the unknown. However, the second tradition is difficult, uncomfortable, and dangerous. And if it attracted too many followers, it would end up destroying the society, which, following the example of the ants, took so long to build. And so the second tradition went underground and has only managed to survive over so many centuries because followers created a secret language of signs. Did you ask more questions? Of course I did, because although I denied it, he knew I was dissatisfied with what I was doing. My protector said, I'm afraid of taking steps that are not on the map. But by taking those steps, despite my fears, I have a much more interesting life. I asked more about the tradition, and he said something like, as long as God is merely a man, we'll always have enough food to eat and somewhere to live when the mother finally regains her freedom. We might have to sleep rough and live on love. Or we might be able to balance emotion and work. My protector then asked, if you weren't a biologist, what would you be? I said a blacksmith, but they don't earn enough money. And he replied, well, when you grow tired of being what you're not, go and have fun and celebrate life, hammering metal into shape. In time, you'll discover that it will give you more than pleasure. It will give you meaning. How do I follow this tradition you spoke of? I asked. As I said, through symbols. He replied, start doing what you want to do, and everything else will be revealed to you. Believe that God is the mother and looks after her children and never lets anything bad happen to them. I did that and I survived. I discovered that there were other people who did the same, but who are considered to be mad, irresponsible, superstitious. Since time immemorial, they've sought their inspiration in nature. We build pyramids, but we also develop symbols. Having said that, he left, and I never saw him again. I only know from that moment on, symbols did begin to appear because my eyes had been opened by that conversation. Hard though it was, one evening I told my family that although I had everything a man could dream of having, I was unhappy that I had, in fact, been born to be a blacksmith. My wife protested, saying, "You were born a gypsy and had to face endless humiliations to get where you are, and yet you want to go back?" My son, however, was thrilled because he too liked to watch the blacksmiths in our village and hated the laboratories in the big cities. I started dividing my time between biological research and working as a blacksmith's apprentice. I was always tired, but I was much happier. One day I left my job and set up my own blacksmith business which went completely wrong from the start. Just when I was starting to believe in life, things got markedly worse. One day I was working away and I saw that there before me was a symbol. The unworked steel arrives in my workshop and I have to transform it into parts for cars, agricultural machinery, kitchen utensils. Do you know how that's done? First, I heat the metal till it's red hot, then I beat it mercilessly with my heaviest hammer until the metal takes on the form I need. Then I plunge it into a bucket of cold water and the whole workshop is filled with a roar of steam, while the metal sizzles and crackles in response to the sudden change in temperature. I have to keep repeating the process until the object I'm making is perfect. Once is not enough. The blacksmith paused for a long time, lit a cigarette, and went on. Sometimes the steel I get simply can't withstand such treatment. The heat, the hammer blows, the cold water cause it to crack, and I know that I'll never be able to make it into a good plowshare or an engine shaft. Then I throw it onto the pile of scrap metal at the entrance to my forge. Another long pause. Then the blacksmith concluded, "I know that God is putting me through the fire of afflictions. I've accepted the blows that life has dealt me, and sometimes I feel as cold and indifferent as the water that inflicts such pain on the steel. But my one prayer is this: please God, my mother, don't give up until I've taken on the shape that you wish for me. Do this by whatever means you think best, for as long as you like, but never throw me on the scrap heap of souls." I like that. That's a good solid place where I'm going to stop, and we will catch up on this later. Namaste. I'll talk to you later. Alright, your boy's back. My roommate showed up and I didn't want to be rude. So I think I have that. Alright. You can see me. Cool. I've been drunk when I finished my I may have been drunk when I finished my conversation with that man, but I knew that my life had changed. There was a tradition behind everything we learn, and I needed to go in search of people who consciously or unconsciously were able to make manifest the female side of God. Instead of cursing my government and all the political shenanigans, I decided to do what I really wanted to do: heal people. I wasn't interested in anything else. Since I didn't have the necessary resources, I approached the local men and women, and they guided me to the world of medicinal herbs. I discovered that there was a popular tradition that went back hundreds of years and was passed from generation to generation through experience rather than through technical knowledge. With their help, I was able to do far more than I would otherwise have been able to do, because I wasn't there merely to fulfill a university task or to help my government to sell arms or unwittingly to spread political propaganda. I was there because healing people had made me happy. This brought me closer to nature, to the oral tradition, and to plants. Back in Britain, I decided to talk to other doctors, and I asked them, "Do you always know exactly which medicines to prescribe, or are you sometimes guided by intuition?" Almost all of them, once they had dropped their guard, admitted that they were often guided by a voice, and that when they ignored the advice of the voice, they ended up giving the wrong treatment. Obviously, they make use of all the available technology, but they know that there is a dark corner, where lies the real meaning of the cure, and the best decision to make. My protector threw my world off balance. Even though he was only a gypsy blacksmith, I used to go at least once a year to his village, and we would talk about how, when we dare to see things differently, life opens up to our eyes. On one of those visits, I met other disciples of his, and together we discussed our fears and our conquests. My protector said I too get scared, but it's at such moments that I discover a wisdom that is beyond me, and I go forward. Now I earn a lot of money working as a GP in Edinburgh, and I would earn even more if I went to work in London, but I prefer to make the most out of life and to take time out. I do what I like. I combine the healing processes of the ancients, the arcane tradition, and with the most modern techniques of present-day medicine. The Hippocratic tradition. I'm writing a paper on the subject, and many people in the scientific community, when they see my text published in a specialist journal, will dare to take the steps which deep down they've always wanted to take. I don't believe that the mind is the source of all ills. There are real diseases too. I think antibiotics and antivirals were great advances for humanity, and I don't believe that a patient of mine with appendicitis can be cured by meditation alone. What he needs is some good emergency surgery. So I take each step with courage and fear, combining technique and inspiration, and I'm careful who I say these things to, because I might get dubbed a witch doctor, and then many lives that I could have saved would be lost when I'm not sure. I asked the Great Mother for help. She has never yet failed to answer me, but she has always counseled me to be discreet. She probably gave the same advice to Athena on more than one occasion, but Athena was too fascinated by the world. She was just starting to discover, and she didn't listen. A London newspaper, August 24th, 1991. The Witch of Portobello, London. There's another reason why I don't believe in God. I mean, look at the behavior of people who believe. This was the reaction of Robert Wilson, one of the traders in Portobello Road. This road, known around the world for its antique shops and its Saturday flea markets, was transformed last night into a battlefield, requiring the intervention of at least 50 police officers from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea to restore order. And by the end of the fracas, 5 people had been injured, although none seriously. The reason behind this pitched battle, which lasted nearly 2 hours, was a demonstration organized by the Reverend Ian Buck to protest about what he called the satanic cult at the heart of England. Sorry. According to Reverend Buck, a group of suspicious individuals have been keeping the neighborhood awake every Monday for the last 6 months, Monday being their chosen night for invoking the devil. The ceremonies are led by a Lebanese woman, Shireen H. Coelho, who calls herself Athena after the goddess of wisdom. About 200 people began meeting in a former East India Company warehouse, but the numbers increased over time, and in recent weeks, an equally large crowd has been gathering outside, hoping to gain entry and take part in the ceremony. When his various verbal complaints, petitions, and letters to the local newspaper achieved nothing, Reverend Buck decided to mobilize the community, calling on his parishioners to gather outside the warehouse by 1900 hours yesterday to stop the devil worshippers from getting in. As soon as we received the first complaint, we sent someone to inspect the place, but no drugs were found, nor evidence of any other kind of illicit activity, said an official who preferred not to be identified because an inquiry has just been set up to investigate what happened. They aren't contravening the noise nuisance laws because they turn off the music at 10 o'clock prompt, so there's really nothing more we can do. Britain, after all, allows freedom of worship. The Reverend Buck has another version of events. The fact is that this witch of Portobello, this mistress of charlatanism, fuck me, God. Why are people like this? Has contacts with people high up in the government. Which explains why the police, paid for the taxpayers' money to maintain order and decency, refuse to do anything. We're living in an age in which everything is allowed, and democracy is being devoured and destroyed by that limitless freedom. Limitless freedom. Just saying. Just saying. The vicar says that he was suspicious of the group right from the start. They had rented a crumbling old building and had spent days trying to renovate it, which is clear evidence that they belong to some sect and have undergone some kind of brainwashing. Because no one in today's world works for free. When asked if his parishioners ever did any charitable work in the community, the Reverend Bucks replied, "Yes, but we do it in the name of Jesus." Yesterday evening, when she arrived at the warehouse to meet her waiting followers, Shireen Khalil, her son, and some of her friends were prevented by entering by the Reverend Buck's parishioners, who were carrying placards, and using megaphones to call on the rest of the neighborhood to join them. This verbal aggression immediately degenerated into fighting, and as soon as it was possible to control either side, they say they're fighting in the name of Jesus, but what they really want is for people to continue to ignore the teachings of Christ, according to which we are all gods, said the well-known actress Andrea McCain, one of Shireen Khalil's or Athena's followers. Miss McCain received a cut above her right eye, which was treated at once, and she left the area before your reporter could find out more about her links with the sect. Once order was restored, Mrs. Khalil was anxious to reassure her 8-year-old son, but she did tell us that all that takes place in the warehouse is some collective dancing, followed by the invocation of a being known as Hagia Sophia, of whom people are free to ask questions. The celebration ends with a kind of sermon and a group prayer to the Great Mother. The officer charged with investigating the original complaints confirmed this. As far as we could ascertain, the group has no name and is not registered as a charity. According to the lawyer Sheldon Williams, this is not necessary. We live in a free country and people can gather together in an enclosed space for non-profit making activities as long as these do not break any laws such as incitement to racism or the consumption of narcotics. Mrs. Khalil emphatically rejected any suggestion that we should stop the meetings because of the disturbances. We gather together to offer mutual encouragement, she said, because it's very hard to face social pressures alone. I demand that your newspaper denounce the religious discrimination to which we've been subjected to over the centuries. Whenever we do something that is not in accord with the state-instituted and state-approved religions, there's always an attempt to crush us, as happened today. Before, we would have faced martyrdom, prison, being burned at the stake, or sent into exile, and now we are in a position to respond, and force will be answered with force. Just as compassion will be repaid with compassion. When faced with the Reverend Buck's accusation, she accused him of manipulating his parishioners and using intolerance and lies as an excuse for violence. According to the sociologist Arthod Lennox, phenomena like this will become increasingly common in the future, possibly involving more serious clashes between established religions. Now that the Marxist utopia has shown itself incapable of channeling society's ideals, the world is ripe for a religious revival. Born of civilization's natural fear of significant dates. However, I believe that when the year 2000 does arrive and the world survives intact, common sense will prevail and religions will revert to being a refuge for the weak, who are always in search of guidance. And this view is contested by Dom Evaristo Piazza, the Vatican's auxiliary bishop in the United Kingdom, What we are seeing is not the spiritual awakening that we all long for, but a wave of what Americans call New Ageism, a kind of a breeding ground in which everything is permitted, where dogmas are not respected, and the most absurd ideas from the past return to lay waste on the human mind. Unscrupulous people like this young woman are trying to instill their false ideas in weak, suggestible minds, with the one aim of making money and gaining personal power. It was a non-profit thing. It was free. Unlike the Vatican. Okay, just saying. The German historian Franz Herbert, currently working at the Goethe Institute in London, has a different idea. The established religions no longer ask fundamental questions about our identity and our reason for living. Instead, they concentrate purely on a series of dogmas and rules concerned only with fitting in a particular social and political organization. People in search of real spirituality are therefore setting off in new directions, and that inevitably means a return to the past and to primitive religions. Before, those religions were contaminated by the structures of power. At the police station where the incident was recorded, Sergeant William Morton stated that should Shireen Khalil's group decide to hold their meeting on the following Monday and feel that they are under threat, when they must apply in writing for police protection and thus avoid a repetition of last night's events, with additional information from Andrew Fish, photos by Mark Gillum, Heron Ryan, journalist. I read the report on the plane when I was flying back from the Ukraine, feeling full of doubts. I still hadn't managed to ascertain whether the Chernobyl disaster had been as big as it was said to have been, or whether it had been used by the major oil producers to inhibit the use of other sources of energy. Anyway, I was horrified by what I read in the article. The photos showed broken windows, a furious Reverend Buck, and there lay the danger of a beautiful woman with fiery eyes and her son in her arms. I saw at once what could happen, both good and bad. I went straight from the airport to Portobello, convinced that both my predictions would become reality. On the positive side, the following Monday's meeting was one of the most successful events in the area's history. Many local people came, some curious to see the being mentioned in the article.
I finished it.
Oh, nice. Let me see. Oh, that's super cool. I love it.
I finished it, finally.
I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. I can't believe you did it all by yourself.
I did.
That's awesome. Where was I? Oh, yes. Others bearing placards defending freedom of religion and freedom of speech. The venue would only hold 200 people, so the rest of the crowd were all crammed together on the pavement outside, hoping for at least a glimpse of the woman who appeared to be the priestess of the oppressed. When she arrived, she was received with applause, handwritten notes, and requests for help. Some people threw flowers, and one lady of uncertain age asked her to keep on fighting for women's freedom and for the right to worship the Mother. The parishioners from the week before must have been intimidated by the crowd and so failed to turn up, despite the threats they had made during the previous days. There were no more aggressive comments, and the ceremony passed off as normal. With dancing, the appearance of Hagia Sophia, by then I knew that she was simply another facet of Athena herself. In a final celebration, this had been added recently when the group moved to the warehouse, lent by one of its original members, and that was that. During her sermon, Athena spoke as if possessed by someone else. We all have a duty to love and to allow love to manifest itself in the way it thinks best. We cannot and must not be frightened when the powers of darkness want to make themselves heard. Those same powers that introduce the word sin merely to control our hearts and minds Jesus Christ, whom we all know, turned to the woman taken in adultery and said, Has no man condemned thee? Neither do I condemn thee. He healed people on the Sabbath, and he allowed a prostitute to wash his feet, and he promised a thief that he would enjoy the delights of paradise, and he ate forbidden fruits, and he said that we should concern ourselves only with today, because the lilies in the field toil not, neither do they spin, but are arrayed in glory. What is sin? It is a sin to prevent love from showing itself, and the mother is love. We are entering a new world in which we can choose to follow our own steps, not those that society forces us to take. If necessary, we will confront the forces of darkness again, as we did last week, but no one will silence our voice or our heart. I was witnessing the transformation of a woman into an icon. She spoke with great conviction, with dignity, and with faith in what she was saying. I hoped that things really were like that we truly were entering a new world, and that I would live to see it. She left the warehouse to as much acclaim as she had entered it, and when she saw me in the crowd, she called me over and said that she'd missed me. She was happy and confident and sure she was doing the right thing. This was the positive side of the newspaper article. Things might have ended there. I wanted my analysis of events to be wrong, but 3 days later my prediction was confirmed. The negative side emerged full force. Employing the services of one of the most highly regarded and conservative law practices in Britain, whose senior partners, unlike Athena, really did have contacts in all spheres of the government, and basing his case on published statements made by Athena, the Reverend Buck called a news conference to say that he was suing for defamation, calumny, and moral damages to his ego. God damn. Somebody kill this man. I'm just kidding. The deputy editor called me in. This reminds me of the story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. That religious fucking bishop guy who just had to kill Esmeralda. Anyway. The deputy editor called me in. He knew I was friendly with the central figure in that scandal and suggested that we publish an exclusive interview. My first reaction was of disgust. How could I use my friendship to sell newspapers? After all, we had talked further. I started to think it might be a good idea. She would have the chance to present her side of the story. Indeed, she could use the interview to promote all the things for which she was now openly fighting. I left the deputy editor's office with the plan we had drawn up together, a series of articles on new trends in society and on radical changes that were taking place in search of religious belief. In one of those articles, I would publish Athena's point of view. That same afternoon, I went to her house, taking advantage of the fact that the invitation had come from her. When we met outside the warehouse, the neighbors told me that the day before, court officials had attempted to serve a summons on her but failed. I phoned later on without success. I tried again as night was falling, but no one answered. From then on, I phoned every half an hour, growing more anxious with each call. Ever since Hagia Sophia had cured my insomnia, tiredness drove me to bed at 11 o'clock, but this time anxiety kept me awake. I found her mother's number in the phone book, but it was late, and if Athena wasn't there, then I would only cause the whole family to worry. What to do? I turned on the TV to see if anything had happened. Nothing special. London continued as before, with its marvels and its perils. I decided to try one last time. The phone rang 3 times, and someone answered. I recognized Andrea's voice at once. What do you want? She asked. Athena asked me to get in touch. Is everything all right? Everything's all right and not all right, depending on your way of looking at things. But I think you might be able to help. Where is she? She hung up without saying anything more. Alright, I'm gonna let it be here. And then, yes. And then I will continue reading in la mañana. That book, it stirs something inside of me. I don't know. I can't explain that. But yeah, anyway, namaste. I love you guys and have a great day.